Welcome to Richard and Greg, a channel dedicated to discussion, debate and argument on a whole array of topics. Today we talk to Greg about the current coronavirus figures, issues concerning the World Health Organization, the perceived and what Greg believes to be the true origins of the virus, and the argument whether school children should be allowed to go back to school and soon. So let's go over to that debate. Welcome to Richard and Greg. It's Monday, the 4th of May, 2020, and the time is 20:05 GMT +1. Now today we have a coronavirus update with over 3.6 million cases worldwide and over 250,000 deaths. So we shall go over to Greg and ask him really what has attracted his attention after giving us his figures. Greg, good evening to you.
Good evening, and yet another nice day. Something's happened to our weather. It hasn't been warm, but one wouldn't expect it to be warm at this time of year, not in Britain. But on the other hand, it has been passable. As for the coronavirus, it's interesting to note that we are now pushing towards 4 million declared members of the club who have been diagnosed with coronavirus. It's probably nearer 20 or 30 million, in fact, but very few people have access to free medicine, and thus very few are checked. Most people in around the world will find themselves, as with Brazil, dying at home. And when you think of Brazil's figures, which are 102,000 with 7,000 declared dead so far, it is interesting to note that they have dug 13,000 graves in Sao Paulo alone. Sao Paulo is just one of their main cities. I would imagine that in areas like Manaus, Palavelo, Cuiabá, and the like, that the death rate is staggering once it gets going in the area, because medicine is hard to come by. The people are poor, and when you come to a city like Rio, once it gets going in the favelas, it will be A, impossible to count, and B, terrifying. This disease is not being reported honestly anywhere in the world, though I give the British government at the moment full marks for trying to come up with figures that compare this year with other years in terms of deaths per million population in the first 4 months of the year. The Office of National Statistics has given a figure, and we are markedly higher. We are higher in death terms than we were in 1967-68 with a very bad flu outbreak. We have a higher death rate per capita than we had in 1957 when there was a flu outbreak, which was much higher than most years. But we are not on the proportions that we were during the outbreak of 1917, 1918, and 1919, when Britain is believed to have lost somewhere in the region of 260 people to the last world pandemic, which was Spanish flu. When you think of that in terms of the previous major pandemic of the mid to late 1600s, as I recall, it was either 1665 or 1685, I think 65, when 1 in 3 people died in London. That's over 100,000 deaths in a city with, in those days, only 300,000 people. The pandemic of the plague during the 13 and 1400s is thought to have wiped out between 40 and 60% of the total population of Europe. Pandemics are not new to mankind. However, modern techniques and modern controls and modern abilities to deal with a pandemic mean that we are getting the figures rapidly at the time. Go back to 1665 and you'll find that the only way people realized that people were dying at the rate they were was because the bodies were stacked in the street because they couldn't cope with getting rid of them. But then again, if you live in countries like China or Russia, you're fairly used to that sort of death rate. When you think of Russia, when the Russians, after the Bolshevik Revolution, found their people were starving and well over 5 million people died of starvation, they were even selling body parts as food on tables in the street. Their children and their relatives who had already died. China had 50 million approximately die in their so-called cultural revolution. Who would want a culture like that? We have a problem and people are not facing up to it. It was interesting to hear on one of our main political programs on Sunday, the Andrew Marr program. He interviewed a very pleasant and informative spokesperson for the World Health Organization, a doctor, pleasant, informative, and I got the impression genuinely accurate. He said to the spokeswoman, Mr. Trump has stated that this virus has come from the laboratory and was leaked from the laboratory in Wuhan and is as a result of China and their laboratory. Is there any truth in this? And the woman replied, we know that the coronavirus, its main reservoir is harbored in bats. Every so often, it passes to other species. We have seen it pass to pigs and birds, particularly. And of the occasions when that happens, there are occasions when it passes to human beings. Fortunately, rarely. This is just a mutation of the coronavirus, as has been previous outbreaks like SARS and Middle East respiratory syndrome and bird flu. And Ma turned round and he said, "Thank you very much, Dr. So-and-so. And thank you for coming on the program and making it all so clear." And that was her cut off. Ma turned to camera and said, "So you see, this was not from the laboratory in Wuhan. It was from animals." That wasn't remotely what she said. That was merely the BBC's interpretation to suit their bias and their present propaganda. At no time did she say it didn't come from the laboratory. At any one time, you will find places like Aldermaston, Pirbright, Winnipeg, and Wuhan are testing, experimenting, and researching viruses of all descriptions. At this very moment, you will find laboratories working with Ebola, Marburg monkey disease, green monkey disease, and a host of others, looking to find out how they work, how we can spot them early on, how we can tell if it's going to be a bad outbreak or a mild one, and how we can work towards producing a vaccine. It is natural that laboratories like those are working continuously to investigate and try and find vaccines for viruses. Unfortunately, this time it looks as if the virus, having been obtained, we understand, clandestinely, possibly with the help of the French, from Winnipeg in Canada, where it was being worked on, and transferred to Wuhan laboratory, which would appear to have a fair amount of French involvement. Whether they actually have shares in it, I don't know. But in 2017, America said that they were concerned that the standard of biosecurity at the laboratory in Wuhan was possibly not up to standard, and it was dangerous that it was located in a city with 11 million people. Now, when you start looking at how these outbreaks perform, if there is a leak, one can understand why the Chinese would try to blame what is known as their wet market, which is relatively close to their laboratory in Wuhan. It wouldn't have got to their wet market if it had not leaked out of Wuhan. So let's start being realistic about this. I'm sure it wasn't deliberately leaked. I'm certain it wasn't a man-made virus. I'm positive that there has been an accident, which it is probable China believed that they could solve, cope with, and cover up. No country likes to admit to rank incompetence that leads to the death of potentially millions of people. So beware of reporting. It's how they word it, not what they say. Now we're in a position where they're talking of reducing the lockdown. We're very fortunate in Britain and in other Western countries. We do not have a huge body of poor with no access to medicine and no social services, which means we can maintain the lockdown longer. One has to feel sorry for countries like South Africa, in fact, most of Africa, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, most countries in South America, and also America, who do not have a strong, responsible social service or public medicine free at the point of need. These people are potentially being forced back to work and back into what used to pass for a normal environment much earlier than common sense would lead one to wish to go back. They're being forced back because without savings and without income and without the benefit of social medicine and without social benefits, starvation starts to happen. It is why in history we have seen periods of starvation. Starvation that spread right across the planet and has done so from time to time. India used to have a period of starvation, I mean the Indian subcontinent, not just the modern country of India, a period of starvation that would take 10 to 20 million, and that used to happen every 10 to 12 years. Although they produce enough food to export food, somewhere in the region of 2/3 of all the food that is produced is eaten or destroyed by rodents and other pests. It's not a simple world. We are on a very challenging lump of rock, hurtling through space at an incredible speed, with realistically our only source of heating being our local star, which we have a variable orbit around and which puts out variable amounts of heat, usually dependent on sunspots and the number of sunspots that are emitting heat from the star. We are currently, if you actually look at the statistics over history, not just the recent suitable history to suit the media and people who are trying to promote their personal income, we have a fairly low level of carbon dioxide at the moment, which means crops are not doing as well as they might do. You will find that if you go to any large nursery that is working on the cutting edge of the marketing of plants, that they have huge tanks of CO2 in their greenhouses, and they try to push up CO2 above the 350 to 400 parts per million, which we are currently experiencing in this period of history, to a more viable 1,000 to 1,200 parts per minimum, which suits plant life, forests, grass, grain, and all other plant life. And as a result of that, provides huge amounts of nutrient for grazing animals and provides a huge amount more production because of the improved grazing amongst the carnivores and omnivores on the planet.
Greg, I'd like us, please, to come off that part of the subject, please. We're talking about coronavirus, and you mentioned the fact that in this country and parts of the Western world, we are fortunate in that we can stay within lockdown longer because other people who do not have the benefits of our systems are forced back to work. Well, if that's the case, why is the British government considering sending school children back into schools then?
Quite honestly, it's my belief that most of that is due to clamoring from people who haven't thought this through in detail. Politicians are in the odious position where they have to please the public, and the public may not be particularly well informed. It is surprising how easy it is for the charlatans to preach false gospels regarding the dangers that do or don't exist. We have the David Icks of this world trying to convince us all that the virus is a plot. We have other individuals who are in many ways seen as responsible individuals, like Peter Hitchin, saying stupid things like, we should never have stopped work, we should have been more stoic as we were in the 1960s, when 80,000 people died of flu in Britain. This is not flu. Flu, you can at least more or less count on flu dying out at the end of winter. This is not flu. It is happening in countries with dry, hot temperatures. It's happening in rainforests. It's happening in cold countries. It is not flu. It bears little or no similarity to flu, and we haven't actually got a clue how it's working. Why, on some people, does it attack organs like the liver and the kidney and the pancreas? Yet on others, it is immediately respiratory and goes to the lungs. Why are different age groups seen to be dying at different rates? Why does it appear that non-Caucasians appear to have a higher morbidity? How much of this is due to social conditions? How much of it is due to density of population? Could America's saving grace be the large areas of open rural land between the conurbations? That might cut their death rate, but it doesn't look like it's cutting much at the moment, with 70,000 already dead. And let's bear in mind, the disease got to America quite a while after it was all but endemic in other countries. I think the longer we can put off children going back to school, the better. And let's face it, we're sitting now in May. We would have June as possibly a date for going back to school. Well, schools all go on holiday in July. Why not make a positive decision that we are not going to send our children back to school until the beginning of the Christmas term, which falls usually somewhere around the end of August to mid-September, dependent what country you live in. The longer we can keep children out of school, the better. The longer we can have big sectors of our community supported by our government, by the taxes we have paid, so that they do not have to engage in risk like public transport. And we are going to find, inevitably, there will be people who think this through, who will not be going to restaurants, have no desire to go to pubs, do not wish to travel on public transport if they can avoid it, and life will be very, very different at the end of this.
So your advice then, Greg, is stay at home regardless of the economic, social or educational cost?
Which is more important to you, money or being alive to spend it?
And on that happy note, Greg, thank you very much.
Not exactly my pleasure to bring the truth rather than good news.
Indeed.
I appreciate that a channel like ours will not be popular because people want to hear good news. But will that protect them from anything? Will they be cautious because they've been given good news glibly? I would rather issue the cautionary possibility so that all our listeners survive this pandemic. Good luck.
Thank you, Greg. Speak soon. We hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if so, kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell sign so that you are notified of our videos as and when they are published. And also in the description box below, we place links to certain books, articles and programs which you may find of benefit, and for which we will receive a small commission should you purchase through our link. And this will help support our channel and to enable us to develop it further.